Goedenavond. Welkom allemaal. Oh, I'm going to continue in English. Welcome everybody in Pakhuis de Zwijger, where we have our 38th edition of the Circular City. And tonight it's titled The Wasted City. We will have the opportunity to present to you, we have a book launch actually, with the same title, The Wasted City. And of course, everybody knows if you go into a discussion on circularity, the cliche is that waste is a resource. That's like if you sum up circularity and you ask for a summary, you get, oh, you know, waste is a resource. Afval is grondstof. And if that is the case, if that's the case, we are still learning about it and researching and exploring, actually. And tonight, a group of people has written a quite amazing book where they explore notions of this circular city making. What is that? What is meant if you talk about circular city making? What are perspectives, or how can you look at that concept? What do you need to address? Principles. And all this is written down now in a great book, which will be launched tonight. And one of the people who have actually made that book a reality, I will ask to join me on stage. A few years ago, we think it was 5 years ago or 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we had another book launch, your first book launch, and it was about farming the city. 4 years later, we are actually talking about the next step in that line of thinking. So give her a very warm welcome, Francesca Miazzo, one of our own. So, Francesca, The Wasted City. It's actually a spin-off of a project you've been developing since several years here in Amsterdam.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that project?
Yes, it's a project where we started to ask people why you recycle, why you don't recycle, and we work really carefully within a local community to try to develop a different way of dealing with waste. And that was an experiment that we did to try to develop an innovative solution that goes beyond thinking of a material as a solution, but that would include the whole community in something new. And as a coincidence, and this is really a coincidence, a month ago, or a little bit less, the World Economic Forum picked the project and
Davos, right? In Davos, yes.
And made an amazing 1-minute video about it, which is on screen right now. So it's the best way to show what we've been achieved till now.
And for those, oh really? But you really didn't know it, right?
Didn't know, nothing.
That they were actually choosing your project and making a film of that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Davos. Yes.
Yeah. That's it?
That's it?
Yeah. 1 minute.
Yeah, fantastic. Normally it takes you much longer to explain like social return and awareness and community building and all that.
Social contract, we are the mediator in between the entrepreneurs and the community. That's it.
That's it.
So, but what I would like to, we started from this because we actually want to talk about the book tonight. And the book comes as our, we always, at cities, we always start trying to understand better a global problem. And we try to find a local solution. We get very, very much into the practicalities of a problem, and we come up with something. And when you try to generalize back, you realize that, of course, you're not the only one doing this, and that there is a whole movement of people doing what you're doing. But what's amazing about circular city making is such a kind of a new concept that everyone is super opinionated about it. There are already like different kinds of teams that go for this or the other solution.
Yeah, and they really don't like the other solution.
Yes, it's already there. And it's funny to see, like, we got, the video got totally viral. We got like 11 million views, and that generated an amazing amount of comments, which really represent like what is right now a little bit the situation with circular city making. You have the 3D printer fanatics everywhere. Like whenever you talk about something that is circular, 3D printed, that's the solution. And so we had like, 3D printer and get your money back? Lol. Yeah. Okay, great. And then we have the ones that think that everything always has to be replicated somewhere else. Yeah. It has to be like there is no context, just take it, copy it, and paste it.
Yes.
Like very old school thinking, but they think that's the way to go. I'm a person very context oriented, so I call them the imperialists, but I'm sure most of them they meant very good with their comments. And then we have the ones that always think that everything comes from a political party that is trying to, and that is trying to destroy our lives and make things, very difficult or very easy, but actually is bad for us. Yeah. And it's funny, like, you know what Rothschild own something? Like, anyway, someone...
it's a very, very rich banker's family.
Yeah, so it's probably from them, the wasted scheme.
Yes.
Yeah.
You are actually
yeah, it's my cousin. Yeah. And then, of course...
But you're from Italy, right?
Yeah. And then there are the ones that they know it all. They know that this is okay, but I know how to make it better, I can just write this comment and I have it.
So wooden coins, why use plastic?
Why do you use plastic? Are you crazy? 700 households using plastic? This is gonna be a disaster, especially for the ones that come afterwards, the animal activists. Can you understand that, Comer? 5 green coins equal 1 cow in the Netherlands, in case you didn't know.
No.
Okay. Which tastes better for animals, metal or green plastic coins? That's a good question. And of course, there are the ones that they just have no words. They just, they just like it. They have their own way of expressing themselves, very millennial style. And then, of course, because it's a global video, they are the ones that just think this is happening because we are in the Netherlands, which is true, by the way, but it's only because of the great Dutch people that this is happening. Yes. And I'm like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. How many Dutch people are in your team?
Everyone besides me.
Oh.
Yeah, it's true, and there are a lot of Dutch people participating. Good job to all Dutchies, yeah. Good on you, Holland, for taking the lead.
Again, yeah.
But the best ones, I think, like at the end we had the 3 best comments, and I would like to start with the consultant. Great idea, stay focused, you are heading in the right direction, listen to yourself and don't give up. So proud. I'm like, yeah, thank you, Daddy. then the other, like...
Did you look at the profiles?
No. It was already quite a job to go through the comments. Okay. And then there is the astrologist, which just mentioned that actually there was a green moon that night, and that was all, part of the system. But the best one is...
You forgot about that.
Shakir Rashid Kanakatak, because it was his idea. So, yeah.
So this is your way of getting
selling.
from the project to the book, right? I
Yes.
mean, so explain to me.
That's the way. So if you if you think about circularity, if you think about circular city making, if you think about developing, at the end tonight we will actually talk about developing new systems. It's a very difficult subject, and it's a subject where, especially on social media, everyone can have an opinion and can expose his opinion. So what I wanted to show is that there are a lot of projects. It's very difficult to find some kind of consistency between the projects, but that's what we try to do, like in the comments as well. We try to understand what's going on in the global north. We don't have dichotomies anymore in between small scale, big scale. It's all about hyperlocalism or small approaches, but also we analyze nationwide networks. The scale is changing, the scope is changing. This is a very complex task that the circular city makers are giving to themselves. And with this book, we try to understand a little bit of it. I'm not saying, I will never mention that this is the total encyclopedia of circular city making, but it's a good start for people that have already a little bit of knowledge and opinion about the subject.
Yeah. And then they read the book, and what will happen to them?
They will find a little bit of they will understand that there are different strategies,
yes.
And those are very simply 4 of many approaches, but what happened during the book, we didn't come up with this before.
No.
We did in-depth interviews with more than 20 project owners, and we did analysis of local policymakers, local policies on urban city policy, national policy, and through the opinion pieces, we realized that actually there are these 4 approaches, and actually the people doing things and the city makers, the city policy makers, are very much in line with this. For example, I will talk a lot about hyperlocalism because wasted is one of those cases, but the sharing is such a big subject lately. We have economies, we have infrastructures, we have actually a city policy on sharing where the whole city of Seoul.
Oh, in Seoul, in South Korea.
Yes, they remade the whole sustainable policy based on that concept. And this is also what's happening a lot in our city and in different layers. So that's an example. We have hyperlocalism with cities, with Wasted and other projects that are also working very well at the local level because it's the context that is developing them. And they came out of a need, and they are the solution for that specific need, although you could globalize them, but that's a big issue. I think Jos will get into that. And then we have empowerment and commodity brokerage, which are 2 very, they seem very disconnected subjects, because empowerment, of course, is all about giving people the tools and the education and the possibility to be part of this, while commodity brokerage is the part that everyone is talking about, basically, is how to manage material flows coming in and out. But somehow there is someone here tonight that manages to connect these 2 things together. So, well, I think
Yeah, so to explain, you say we had all these in-depth interviews in the book. We had no beforehand. We didn't know what we would find, but actually when we had and made this analysis, we saw actually that there were 4 approaches, and sometimes projects are only focusing on one approach, and sometimes they combine approaches. But it really helps to understand these 4 different approaches if you want to consider or think or develop notions on circular city making.
Yes.
So they are important ways of looking at the reality.
Yes.
Okay, and then so you've ordered these examples to these approaches, and your own project, Wasted, is an example of one of these approaches,
yes.
Hyperlocalism.
Yeah, so
you'll start with explaining what this approach is, but the other approaches will be explained by somebody else here on stage or through Skype.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think I've been talking already enough about Wasted. I mean, we saw the video, It's a very small project. We are working with the local community. We are very connected with the community. Hyperlocalism is an approach that also, for example, the city of Rotterdam is developing with the policy on 0-10 something, trying to support very localized, innovative projects. And we have it also in Amsterdam with these niche and pockets of innovative solutions. I'm a big fan, but it's, of course, I operate in that realm. But of course, that's not the only way to go. And this is a little bit the old point of the book. Those are not disconnected. Circular city making is not a final.
Yeah.
It's not a final goal. It's a path. It's a way to approach different problems and find a scheme to go into solutions. So.
And what kind of problems are addressed with these circular city making initiatives?
Well, you can see in this case we have waste that is obviously about waste. Actually, as this week we started operating also with textile, paper, and glass. Everyone can subscribe online.
If you live in Amsterdam North.
Yeah, but you can already pre-subscribe if you live in other parts of the city. Yeah. So we can see how it goes. Yeah.
So if it's not operating yet in other parts of the city?
Yeah, actually it is. It is in Oost.
In Oost.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you live in Oost or North, you can subscribe already and actually do something and get these coins. But if you're interested that it will land into your hyper-local situation in the part of the city where you live, you can also pre-subscribe.
Yeah, and then we see how it goes. In stock, a very classic local example of how to take waste out of the supermarket chain and make a beautiful, amazing business out of it. And stick-in biominer is I think it's this one of those two are the smallest projects that we approached. And this is about developing energy out of waste. And the Solidarity Fridge is an amazing project in Spain where they just put a fridge in the street and said, just put your waste food there and people are going to pick it up, and it's working.
And it's really working.
Yeah.
And it's constantly quite full, actually.
Yeah. And
every time it's new things are put in. Yeah. Yeah. And why is it important to have that? Because you say, I'm like a fan of that. Of course, not all city making, circular city making will be hyper-local.
Yeah.
But why is it?
We will approach, I think, the reason why later in the debate, because we will generalize a little bit. And of course, those are examples that work very well in a small scale. There are issues of scalability, issues of legislation, cultural change, democracy. There is something that I would like to approach tonight, but I hope we manage in the debate, is about sharing infrastructure. Can I share the ownership of my waste? Can I share the ownership of my waste food? Who owns that? There are a lot of questions that come as soon as you start going outside the niche. And those are the questions that actually, once you read the book, you want to try to find a way to answer.
Yes. So the why you want to go into hyperlocalism is to get a knowledge or a sense of what in the regimes or in the laws or in the broader context are questions to be solved.
Those are solutions. Those are small solutions that people found themselves, and they are very valuable for a like general approach. Yeah. But there is much more.
Yes. Okay. So for now, thank you for the perspective on the book in general and on the focus on the hyper-localism as an approach. And then I'm going to introduce somebody through Skype. You can take a seat, and I'm going to ask a very big applause for you. Because if I'm correct, Scott Kessler is... Hi, Scott.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly. Can you see us?
I can indeed.
I'm in the middle with the red jacket. Yeah, okay. Yes, so Scott, you're from Brooklyn Microgrids. Can you explain what that project entails?
Yes. So what we are trying to do in Brooklyn is to develop the first community energy network. The idea is that folks can buy and sell energy with one another and establish a real-time price for local clean energy. We think as we push the electric grid to a more localized resource, you need less wires, you need less poles, and we think it also makes sure that the money spent on energy stays in the community. So the idea is to develop basically community energy networks, and most of the energy transactions happen within the energy community, as opposed to today, where it's primarily large generators creating energy, sending it across very large transmission, and then eventually sending it to each consumer.
Yes. And so you are actually in the book as a example of the approach of sharing, sharing local infrastructure in your case, I guess, and sharing energy. Is it a success? I mean, what are the experiences on the ground?
So we're still pretty young, and the results are still coming in. What we have seen is a very large interest from the community. I actually come from the utility space myself, and I assumed that it would be primarily clean energy that was the driver for people joining. But in fact, it has really been the concept of community and keeping things local that has engaged people much more than the cleanliness of the energy. So that's been a really interesting data point for me. Where we stand today, we have about 50 solar producers enrolled, and we can take other energy sources that just the community currently only really has solar. And we have about over 300 consumers who are signed up to participate. So we are still small, but growing pretty quickly and looking to really scale up over the next year.
And scaling up until what point? I mean, will all these roads, we see a picture in the screen, all these roads now have solar panels or all roofs? What is your idea of growth?
So we really want this to be a standalone, self-sustaining business. We think we need to come up with a business model that is right for us, the community, and the local utility, and needs to make all three parties happy. But the idea is, this is not really a technological test where we're going to stop at a certain point. We really think this can be an example for the entire world of the type of community microgrids or community energy networks that we need to further the distributed energy economy and the clean energy economy.
So you say this is a way that the revenues of the energy production are actually staying in the local community. How is that guaranteed?
Because all of the producers are within the community.
So they spend it again.
Because anytime you buy local clean energy, we know the exact area of which the producers come from. We can tell you that it's within the community you live in. If I were to set up a community energy network in Amsterdam, for example, we would know that the only producers supplying local energy for that were located within Amsterdam. So that is sort of how we guarantee the origin.
Okay, and so you don't actually. Can I also order this energy now in Brooklyn?
So if you lived in our area of Brooklyn, you could sign up today to participate.
Yeah. And what is your idea of? Are you going to copy this, or because you say we're going to try to also create in different areas or different cities this model?
So we think it's a model that can be replicated around the world, but it's likely a slightly different model for each community, because the idea is we do not want to say what's right for Brooklyn is what's right for everyone else. We think the underlying technology is flexible enough, though, that when you adopt these sort of desires for whatever community we are going towards, you can adapt the business model to that community as well. So just like before when I said we had to develop something that worked for us, the community, and the utility, we would have to do that in each new location. But I think there's a solution for each neighborhood.
And what is that underlying? What's the essence of the underlying technology?
So the underlying technology is actually based on blockchain. So just like in the financial sector, where Bitcoin and other technologies have made it so that folks do not need a bank in between them, in the energy industry, we can apply those same concepts to energy. So you can actually buy and sell electrons between neighbors without any third party in between them.
Yeah, I'm looking at the audience now. Is everybody already there selling electrons without a third party between them? Everybody's like, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Not a problem. Yes. So blockchain is really just a distributed database. So the idea is that from a financial,
There's no central
use
node,
case,
there's no central point, no central bank, no central thing.
exactly. Yes. And you and I can send data to each other, and we know securely that I haven't sent that money to anyone else and that I actually have that money. Well, we are taking that same idea and applying it to energy, with the idea, if I am sending electrons back onto the grid, how do I know who can buy those electrons, and how do I make sure no one else is claiming the same electrons? So we really are doing, it's not all that different. It's just a new sector.
Yes. Okay. So thank you so much for this perspective on one of the approaches within circular city making. Did you realize that you were actually an example of an approach, a sharing approach, or did you hear about it and think, oh yeah, I think I am part of a sharing approach?
I would say it's probably more the second. I mean, me and our founders, we all come from the energy space.
Yeah.
And so we were looking at this as, how do you better integrate renewables and distributed energy into the utility grid? But it turns out the same solution for that is actually a really great example of circular economies and keeping money in communities. So it's actually something we came to after the initial technology was developed.
Nice. Thank you so much for introducing your project here to the audience in Amsterdam. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
As Francesca already mentioned when she was on stage, so you have this hyperlocalism, you have this sharing, but you also have the two other approaches, empowerment and commodity broker. And she said already, well, that sounds a bit, well, not really similar, but actually there is a person here who can actually link those two together. And that person comes from Brighton Waste House, and his name is Duncan Baker-Brown. Can I please get you onto the stage? Thank you so much. I was like, where are you? Yeah. So, Mr. Baker-Brown, you have a presentation prepared, but we're going to pretend it's a bit of an interview, you know? So everybody's like, is that fake? Yeah, it's completely fake. So don't worry about it, because in Amsterdam, everybody knows that already if you do that. So the question, but before I'm going to ask you to give your presentation, a little bit of explanation, what the Brighton Waste House is shortly, and then I'll just get off and I'll give you your 10 minutes space on the stage. Yeah, it's working.
Is this working?
Yeah.
You can all hear me.
Is it working?
Is it working?
Yes.
Cool. Well, thank you for allowing me to come here. I was meant to be Skyping, but I couldn't resist the opportunity to come here. And have you all speak English for the evening. Thank you very much, just for me. The Brighton Waste House was really asking a sort of an impossible question. Could we construct a permanent building made out of material other people throw away? Could it be designed at sort of passive house levels of low energy consumption? And could it be built by kids? So in the UK, sustainable development is being rather poo-pooed, for want of a better phrase. And one of the reasons in the construction industry, which is one of the biggest consumers of stuff, is that we're not able to meet the targets. There's been a lot of post-occupational analysis of buildings that are supposedly low energy. They're not really. So we're blaming the construction industry for not being able to build low-energy houses. So I said, well, I think it is a bit more straightforward. I think kids can build this. And so what I'm going to show you now is a project that was built almost entirely by people of the age of 15 to 21, with one 55-year-old who was exhausted, and that's not me. But the whole idea was to prove that there's no such thing as waste, there's only stuff in the wrong place. And I still haven't actually found the person that came up with that phrase, but it was someone blogging on Tree Hugger. So anyway, what we got was one experienced site agent of 55 years old who really knew how to build things. Myself, I'm 52, a couple of apprentices, and then over 360 students, plus their tutors. So I'm from the School of Architecture and Design. We had some architects and designers involved, students, and then we partnered with a construction school. And they're when they get really young students there. We started using the project as a vehicle, what we call a pedagogic vehicle. So this is an example of a construction system designed by a second-year architecture student. We actually learned from that and incorporated that into the design of the waste house. Whoops. This is the team. And I just wanted to point out there's quite a lot of old people in the foreground hugging all the publicity there, but the woman on the right, she's in charge of, this is something that's really sort of hyper-localism, an organization called Freegal. So Freegal is the UK version of FreeCycle. It's local. It doesn't like FreeCycle for numbers of reasons. But that's Kat Fletcher, and she transformed the project into a project that was built with construction waste, because in the construction industry, we throw away 20% of everything that arrives on a construction site. So she started saying, why not raise people's awareness of our throwaway society and other stuff? And that completely turned the project from this sort of thing, using construction waste, that's in the students' workshop, building the first beam. Now that's a structural beam made out of waste ply and waste timber from skips. And that was built by 16-year-olds. There's one of the 16-year-olds. We had it filmed all the time, proudly talking about the beam he's just made. There's the beams installed. Wherever there was a cavity, we started using insulation, but our insulation was made of rubbish, and this is packing case insulation. And there's the 55-year-old David filling hollow columns with waste plastic. That's a team photograph. There's lots of these sorts of photographs. We filmed everything. We had young people coming to the site. 750 school children visited the live building site for a year while it was being constructed. My head of school was in permanent turmoil with this idea of all these young people on a building site where people can die. We had some very young kids on site. They weren't building, they were visiting. But then we had a summer school, and this is where it really took off, actually, because we had designers and constructors together in teams building this stuff. And there's 4 of them that became apprentices. I've got to be honest, we combined very local stuff, networks, schools, colleges, community groups and volunteers with a national contractor. So the combination of local knowledge and national networks really served us well. And this is when we started thinking we won't just build it out of construction waste, we'll use other stuff. And in 2012, I think the last DVD hire shop went bust and closed, and suddenly you've got billions of DVDs. So we started filling up the walls in the waste house with DVDs, 4,000 DVDs. We could have filled the whole house with DVDs. Videotapes, we still VHS videotapes, 4,000 of those. 25,000 toothbrushes that we collected in only 4 days. Most of them never used. We got them from Gatwick Airport. They approached us via Freegal. So this cabin service company cleans out the jetliners when they land, got us 25,000 toothbrushes. There they are installed. 2 tons of denim. We found a company, this is a 21st century business plan that works. You get your jeans made in China, you import them to the UK, you cut the legs off, you sell them as shorts. 2 tons of denim legs. Vinyl banners we use. Now this is where a designer, and I'm really interested in the role of a designer in all of this, because I think designers can save the world. This is where your knowledge as a designer and how things are put together and how they can be pulled apart really works. So we've got 400 vinyl banners used as something called a vapor control layer in a building. Most buildings need vapor control layers for airtightness. Ours has got 400 vinyl banners which would have gone to landfill. We had other projects at the time. This was a 9-meter high waste totem made out of waste ply, painted with waste paint. And that ended up in the waste. Well, then we had this symposium at the largest construction fair in Europe called EcoBuild. That's our students getting involved in that. We had the waste zone. When that was finished, the material from the waste zone became part of the waste house. We had 12 tons of chalk. In Brighton, we're on chalk on the South Downs. Chalk with no additives. It creates a load-bearing wall that supports the first floor. That's a staircase made out of paper, compressed paper. So there is really interesting ideas, and these are not all my ideas. These are ideas of students. Soundproofing, with old bicycle inner tubes. We had new stuff as well, so we got a PV array, which at the moment creates 25% more power than the building uses. And then Kat kept saying, she kept saying, we can use carpet tiles, can't we? So we actually clad the whole external facades of the building with carpet tiles. 3 years later, they're still looking good. But why there's a close-up of a corner detail is because that was invented by a 15-year-old. He came on site. The first week he came on site, he was physically sick every day. He didn't want to be a carpentry student. He'd been expelled from school for disruptive behavior. That's what we found. A lot of the kids, they didn't really want to be carpenters. You get them on a live site, they find their way. And he invented that corner detail. And that's the upstairs of the house. It's called the waste house. It's not a house. It's a sort of ongoing laboratory. And we are actually monitoring the performance of the walls. And this is my colleague, Nick Gant, who's a product designer and runs the MA in Sustainable Design, which is based in the house, looking at material experiments. So as you know, 360 students, 750 school pupils saw the project. But really, it's me as a designer, the question was, what was my role? I mean, how can you design something when you don't know what the material source is going to be at the moment? I mean, the conclusion is that we need these networks so we can find the materials we need. But we didn't have that at the time. So you really have to know your stuff as a designer. You have to really know how to construct things. What are the roles of the materials that we rely on at the moment? And then think, well, I've got new material resources now, whether it's organic waste or plastic. And this is where you come up with this idea of being commodity brokers. This is Elvis on the right and Cressy on the left. And they've got a company called Elvis and Cressy. And a lot of people think they are designers. But at the moment, Elvis and Cressy buy up the world's supply of damaged fire hoses. And they turn them into luxury handbags and stuff. It has to be expensive because of the cleaning of the fire hose. So there's issues there. But they've got actually 14 other sources of material that they find buyers for. Then you've got Cyril Gutsch with Parley for the Oceans. So here's a media brand developer who's got this company called Parley for the Oceans, raising awareness of ocean waste. And he partnered with Paul Watson, who's a Sea Shepherd captain who's been chasing after illegal whalers and fishing boats for a long time. And this is an aerial shot of the Sea Shepherd as it unloads 75 kilometers of illegal gill nets. They chased an illegal fishing boat for 110 days. On the 111th day, the skipper of the fishing boat scuttled his ship because Parley had been tweeting the fuck out of it. And nobody, and off the record between us, not even Mozambique wanted the fish. And that was the story. They had to get rid of the fish. But the Sea Shepherd salvaged the 75 kilometers of illegal nets. And then with Adidas, they made these training shoes. And now you can buy these training shoes made out of ocean waste. Whether that will be thrown away and end up being ocean waste, I don't know. But then I have to say, the next bit is, I think I might have tweeted everything happens in Amsterdam. But anyway, here we go. Super use, harvest mapping. These are people who are now thinking of the mechanisms to allow for circular systems. And you've got Rota in Brussels, who are pulling down buildings one screw at a time and making money, pulling the building down, designing the new building, and assembling the new building. And this is where it is at the moment, and I'm completely excited about it all. Now, the phrase I've coming up for all of this is mining the Anthropocene. Does everybody know what the Anthropocene is? Does anybody? Yeah. So it's the current geological era we're in for a lot of people. It's the human-made geology we're in. So we've got to work with the stuff that's already been produced, whether that's cities, communities, or iPhones. And that's where I finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And great to have you here. Thank you. Shall we do one round of questions? Let's do that.
Time?
No, well, there's too much time. I know. Don't worry. So anybody, because there will be, after the keynote, which follows after this section, there will be a large public discussion where you can all talk to each other. There will be a empty stage to symbolize the circular economy and that we have a circular conversation. But the question is, who has a question to you, Duncan? Because they say, I didn't understand something, or I have a technical question I really want to address. Yes.
Awesome project. Thank you so much. I'm Paul Manwaring. I'm the founder of the IoT Living Lab here in Amsterdam. And I community build a lot, and I want to engage younger people. And I really want to know how you sell this to younger people who have a very narrow and understanding of the repercussions of what they're doing.
Oh, okay. I slightly differ with you. I'd say the easy sell is with the young people. It's the older people who don't want to change what they do.
But aren't they more interested in engaging in online behaviors instead of physically contributing to communities? That's what I'm finding.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you don't present it like that. You say, we're doing this live project. I think it's never been done before.
It's unique.
It's unique. Actually, for the disenfranchised kids that we were working with, it was their opportunity to see what it was like being in a university. So these are 15, 16-year-olds that have been expelled from school. They're having to do a carpentry course they don't really want to be doing. But actually, you can come and be in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, which is where it's based. This is a university-based project. So come and have a look. So in a way, you're trying to get them inquiring and get them wondering what's going on. And then, I mean, what's been amazing is that we're left with a generation of about 300 carpenters, and not just carpenters, it's all the construction trades, who are now 17 or 18 and just about to graduate. And actually, the only live project they've ever worked on is the waste house. So they're going to go out into normal building sites wondering why stuff's being thrown away. Yeah. So I found it an easier sell to younger people. It was the older people.
Okay, thank you so much for now. Mr. Duncan Baker-Brown, thank you so much. Okay, so these were examples of these approaches to circular city making. But as Francesca already said, in the book is also try to find a more systemic approach or systemic answers to what is that concept of circular city making. And in the book is also a contribution of Joost Beunderman. He's already been in Pakhuis de Zwijger programs always only through Skype. But somehow he also found the way here to Amsterdam. And he's going to give a keynote on systemic change. He's the director of OO, founder of the Impact Hub. And he's also in the book, which you will all buy after this night. So give him a very warm welcome, Mr. Joost Beunderman.
Thank you. Hello, good evening. For modesty's sake, I'm only the co-founder of Impact Hub Brixton, not the whole global network, where I'm pleased to say, actually, we've recycled a lot of disused floor tiles, office floor tiles from our first location into furniture, actually. So, there you go. Let's have the... Ooh, no. I can do this myself. Great. So what I wanted to talk about, really, is something that matters a lot to me, which is that I think we need to think differently if we're really going to embrace the circular economy. The circular economy really is an invitation to complexity. You've already seen some of it. It's about supply chains and waste streams. It's about power grids and all the and contracts and regulations around those power grids. And none of these things are simple. And we're talking about massive change here, but we don't always talk enough about the systems that sit behind that. And just to give you a reminder of what we're talking about, not that I think it's really necessary, but you may have seen last week, this is a picture from Henderson Islands, an island somewhere far away in the ocean. No human being ever sets foot there, and it's very unspoiled apart from the beach. And researchers were there recently and found over 38 million pieces of garbage, most of which plastic. That is 4,500 pieces per square meter, buried from sort of 10 centimeters upwards, or just visible like this. And I don't know about you, but part of me thought when I saw that, well, why the hell didn't they just bloody clean it up, right? When they were there, taking pictures of it, whereas they could have been just litter picking. But the point is, that's not the point. Cleaning it up would have been pretty pointless, particularly because there's 13,000 new pieces of plastic arriving every day, and that rate is increasing. So our first instincts, our first responses, why can't they just don't always stack up where it comes to facing the challenge, right? We have adequate responses to the complexity of the problem. And this matters because an issue like waste is going to be more important. We thought we had it hard with climate change, and we do, but do you see where we are, more or less? We're at 4, right? This is a study that was published in the Smithsonian magazine, which shows that we're not very likely to hit peak garbage before 2100, the way it's currently going. And that means that actually most of what we're currently thinking, most of what we're currently working on in Amsterdam, globally, is very likely to be inadequate to meet the scale of the challenge that we face. And this is not just an issue in terms of waste and climate change, right? It's generally the case that a lot of the things we're doing that we think are good and worthwhile and make an impact are inadequate. My colleague's favorite example is that the global international aid budgets, or humanitarian aid budget, is $24 billion a year, which sounds like a lot, but it sounds less impressive when you realize that the global market for bubble gum is $26 billion a year. So in many ways, what we're doing isn't even scratching the surface of what is needed. And that has many reasons. This is a book of case studies examples. These are all very intelligent case study examples. And still there is a problem with case studies, right? Because human beings love a good story. And I'm co-responsible and sort of guilty of that too. This is actually a picture from a book that I wrote years ago now with my colleagues, and it's 25 case studies of what we called the Civic Economy at the time. And this is a picture of one of them, the opening of a community co-owned wind farm. And we love a picture of an opening of a community co-owned wind farm, right? Particularly if it's a nice picture like this. And we love the story of the founders. We love the story of what drove them, and particularly if we keep it to one story, it's kind of neat and tidy. We don't love thinking about the complexity of the system and the multiple interrelated causal loops that retain a system in its current place. This is a picture of the sustainability of coastal fisheries in Mexico. And the point, of course, is it shows a very complex system. And this is how most of our reality works, right? That's what we see. That's what's really going on. And this is actually really, once you start mapping it and interrogating it, it's really interesting. They found, for example, that the presence of drug cartels, kind of top right, had a massive impact on the local community's ability to enforce local rules around not fishing too much. Why am I telling you this? Because we don't often, not often enough, talk about the systems that lie behind the stories that we love. And that's very human, right? Humans thrive by being able to reduce complexity to simplicity. That's how we've kind of been hardwired as a species. It's helped us very well in the past, right? Biologically, it's very good to instantly connect lion to I gotta run, right? Very fast. So that's been great for us for thousands of years, except we have created now a society in which simple cause and effect, right? See a dirty beach, clean up the beach, everything will be fine again. That stuff doesn't work anymore, right? So when we talk about the stories of great projects that are changing the world, and we do it at all levels, right? We do it here, tonight. We also do it when we all think that Tesla somehow is going to save our ass and everything will be fine in the end with electric cars and batteries and solar roof tiles, and that so that we don't have to change our behavior quite as much as we feared. So we all think that startups are going to change the world, right? But the current craze for startups is just another version of how, as human beings, we tend to reduce complexity into simple stories. In the 20th century, it was the market and the state, and it was communism versus capitalism, privatization versus the welfare state. Right now, we think startups are going to do it, right? So we're not used to inquiring about the systems that lie behind it. Whereas actually, of course, it's an iceberg challenge. It looks more like a sore tooth, I've increasingly come to realize. But actually, the problem is that what we see are great civic projects, but what lies behind it is some of the complexity that this book goes into. And in that sense, it's brilliant to see so many of you and to be able to have the discussion about this around this book. And the many things it actually mentions, right? The 4 key factors that were already outlined, have to do with what's under the surface, what's under the waterline. It's about local platforms that enable broader participation. It's about perhaps linking founders of projects to each other so they can support each other better. Sometimes it's about the planning system. Sometimes it's about the role of the public sector in all this. It might be about new insurance systems and all sorts of, not very sexy stuff perhaps. The supply chains, computable contract using blockchain. All of that stuff is the real stuff that we need to be talking about. In that sense, we need to talk about what's often called the full stack of the problem. And here's a beautiful story that shows how intelligent people are doing this. There's an Indian Ashoka fellow called Ashoka Network of Social Entrepreneurs called Piyush Tiwari. And his best friend got killed in a car accident. And that was because, he was wounded, he was injured in a car accident, and he was lying there on the street and no one came to save him. And so he bled to death. And Piyush Tiwari at the time was studying in the States, and he came back. He said, this can't be. I need to do something. Human response, right? But he didn't think it was one particular intervention and one magic silver bullet he could fire at this issue in order to save it, right? What he realized is kind of asking questions, figure out what happened. He realized, okay, so people left him there because they were afraid of the police. They were afraid that if they were going to touch him, helping him, that probably they'd get in trouble somehow with the police. So he started campaigning for regulation change, on the one hand, to actually support people if they were ever helping wounded fellow citizens, that they wouldn't be automatically presumed potentially one of the perpetrators of the traffic accident, right? To give people some legal protection. Then he realized, actually, I need to work with the police as well, because they play a massive role in this. So he started to work on culture change within the National Police Force to actually celebrate people who themselves played a role in police officers who themselves played a role in bringing people to hospital or supporting citizens who did so. Then he realized, actually, in a hospital, people were often they were brought there after an accident. Often hospitals didn't know what to do with them because actually hospitals work on the basis of if you haven't got health insurance, well, there's only so much we can do in India, and a lot of people don't have health insurance. So then he started to actually work on the regulation system around how toll roads in particular now need to have health insurance across the board, so that whenever you're on one of these roads, you're insured as a driver, no matter what, and a hospital will always help you. And then there were a few other steps, and finally he ended up, okay, I'm also going to create an app that helps people just report victims of any accidents on the road. Why am I telling you this? It's just because of the last point. He didn't start with just making an app to think that could solve it all, right? Which is now often what we think. If you've got a problem, create an app will solve it. No, he worked on a whole stack of issues, from regulation to culture change, to more regulation, to financial systems, to ultimately also a startup. But the point is, if you don't address the full stack, we're not going to resolve complex issues. And people who've seen me give presentations know that at some point in my presentation, this is going to happen. I'm going to put a picture of my intellectual hero, Elinor Ostrom, on screen. Not because, well, she's amazing. She won the first woman to win the Nobel Prize for economics in 2009. But she spoke about the commons, right? And the way in which the 20th century we've kind of ignored all the rich collective governance systems that actually exist in the world because we're so obsessed with the state and the market. And what she ends up talking about is we need to reinvent. I'm going to skip through this because otherwise the evening will be a long one indeed. This is what I already mentioned, but what she ends up with is important, right? We need to really spend more time together developing institutions that bring out the best in humans. Polycentric institutions that enable us to be more innovative, more trustworthy with each other, better collaborators. And that's the real challenge of our time, building these institutions. Another good example is a TED Talk by Mark Ventresca, a professor at Oxford, who says the entrepreneurship language is not always helpful. Be a systems builder instead. Because we're in a situation where the old is dying and the new struggles to be born. Gramsci, an Italian communist, said this, and he said it very well. But in that context, talking about entrepreneurship isn't always helpful. It's the wrong metaphors. It's the wrong kind of heroic kind of figure role that we're looking for. This is not what happens. If you look at when systems were really changed, for example, when electrification happened in cities, right? That wasn't just entrepreneur. Like we think of it was Edison, right? People like Edison changed the world. It wasn't quite like that. If you dig into it, it was a whole lot of people, coalitions of city makers, the public sector at the time, established companies, slowly changing a system, right? Not just founding new companies, changing the rules, changing finance so that these new companies could be financed, creating new types of technologies together, obviously. And it was slowly, bit by bit, that this system around electricity changed at that time, right? And not just that. They also undid old ways of working, right? Let's not forget that. Cities were all lit before there was electricity, right? There was gas flares everywhere. And that system had slowly, bit by bit, to be dismantled, right? And so all the while, it's a lot more complex than just talking about the great civic entrepreneurs who are going to change our world. And that's the message that I hope you'll take from it. There's 5 things in particular that I think are relevant to mention, right? We need to think much harder about supply chain transparency. I think Duncan said it much better than I could, which is that there's so much waste going on in all parts of our supply chain, and there's no transparency around it, right? We don't know. We don't know the data, and we don't know the stories either, right? So the data is important to understand the scale of the problem, and the stories are important to humanize it, right? Which is why I love, for example, Fairphone, right? Fairphone is the company that makes sustainably sourced smartphones. And it's great that they do it, but they also show you how that works out in a place like the Great Lakes in Rwanda or the Congo, where some of tungsten and other metals come from. They humanize the issue. Secondly, we need to be able to visualize what this circular city looks like, right? It's no good to talk about this stuff just in terms of policy and regulations, right? Which is why I love projects like the Brighton Waste House and the wasted coins, because they start to make this kind of tangible, this reality of what a better system could look like. And we're so obsessed with managing the disasters of the now that sometimes we have an imagination gap where it comes to what this future could be like. And then we end up, of course, telling people what they can't do instead of what they could do. And we're not making it very attractive to live in this future world, which is absolutely essential. We definitely need to reimagine our tax system, right? So Sweden recently announced that they were going to do this, actually lowering the BTV, the value-added tax on repaired goods, because I think that makes sense. It creates a lot of jobs. It creates a lot of lower and medium skills-based jobs which the Swedish economy needs. So they're actually reconfiguring the tax system to reduce waste. And those are the kind of moves we need. So it's not just about local change. It's about how the interplay between hyper-local and our national regulatory system works out. We need to be able to invest in systems, right? We need to be able to invest not just in single startups, but also in a whole cohort of startups together figuring things out. Right? We need to invest not on the basis of whether a company like that is going to make money, but perhaps literally on the basis of how much waste a certain company might prevent in the future. Because that waste will ultimately end up not just in Henderson Island, but also probably in our stomachs through fisheries or whatever. So we need to be able to fund good ideas, not just on the basis of whether they're going to be a fancy company, but also on the basis of what problems they'll solve for us. And we're miles away from doing that. And we need to talk about the stuff under the iceberg, right? We sometimes call it orgware, right? Instead of the hardware, the stuff that we see, we need to talk about all the organizational infrastructure underneath that. Contracts, blockchain-based contracts, for example, quality assurance around, I'd love for that to be a viable market for waste-based building, right? Probably quite a few people will need some convincing about whether that's going to be safe and whether that's going to be, not toxic in the future. So we need to be able to create quality assurance. We need to be able to create contracts. We need to be able to do all the not so very exciting stuff that actually will determine whether this is all going to go big. And I think at the very end, that's the question, isn't it? Whether this is all going to go big. We should not be thinking that these are going to be great projects in the margin, right? This needs to become the new normal. Every disruptive innovation needs to seek to establish what is going to be normal in 5 to 10 years' time. And that's what we're not often good enough about. And that's what we're focused on. My work is focused on, we call it dark matters because we like to talk about the not very sexy stuff. We like to talk about these back-end infrastructures. We call it the dark matter, and I think it's all about creating a new normal. And I think this is an incredibly important start for that conversation. Thank you so much.
Sorry, Joost. Yeah, I want to give the room the opportunity
Go for it.
to ask questions.
I'll have a drink.
Because you were quite in time, so that's really good. Yes. I'm going to give you the mic, and then you are really gentle with it, right? Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much. I loved all these ideas in the circular city, but there's one question that I have in the back of my mind, and is that it all seems to work very well here in the global north. And I don't know if the consequences, not only in terms of extraction and pollution, have been taken into account for the rest of the world who rely on that.
Please.
Oh, absolutely. And I think hopefully some of the examples I gave, the way in which our smartphones are connected to exploitation in the Great Lakes region in Africa, or the fact that our plastic toothbrushes, the ones that aren't recycled in the Brighton waste house, most of them are probably also somewhere in an ocean. So of course, an invitation into complexity is an invitation into global complexity, which of course is why, when someone once said, someone I really admire, that too often the sustainability debate has become about sustainability behind our own gates, right? Sustainability where we can see it. Sustainability where it's kind of nice and comfy and huggable and something that you can, buy and feel good about. When, of course, the point about sustainability is that it's the ultimate global game, and absolutely. And I think the wasted city, each and every wasted city in the globe will ultimately create that wasted globe. And I think it's an imagination gap, right? I mean, when a lot of the stuff that resolves urban pollution issues in the East End, like in London, was because actually wealthy people in West London ultimately got sick if East London was sick as well, right? It's not quite as easy anymore. So we need to be able to create that global imagination of how the stuff that we consume is linked. And we need to be able to humanize it. So we need both the data and the human stories. And then I think we'll get somewhere.
Yeah? Did you want a mic? Yeah.
I'm Jette. I'm a student spatial planning. And my question is, you're talking about changing the system, which I kind of agree. We have to make a system change. But I, as a person, I cannot change the system by myself. So the thing is, what Francesca is doing with Wasted is changing the system, but on a local level. And in order to change the system as a whole, we have to, individually, locally, change our, society, community on a local scale. We cannot change the whole system ourselves. So, my point is like, how would you visualize changing the system?
Very good question.
So I guess we never talk about changing the system. We talk about changing systems. Firstly, it seems...
No,
well,
okay, no. I don't think so.
think I hear you. That seems a bit of a cop-out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's not what I mean. I mean, I think the point is that there's overlapping systems where no particular person has had an evil intentionality to shape it in a certain way, and that therefore, if only we can protest or vote this person out, it'll all be easy, right? There's multiple overlapping systems with lots of incentives for nothing to change, right? And of course, individually, it makes you feel powerless. One of the key things we talk about often, and we do this in London and in Birmingham at a local level as well, is building a new type of collective intelligence around certain issues.
Very good.
What we call sort of distributed understanding of what's going on. Without that kind of distributed understanding of what's really going on, it's very hard for things to change, right? Information, and not just abstract information, but definitely human stories, are ultimately the most powerful drivers for change on the one hand, right? And then, okay, so you have the distributed intelligence around issues, and then, of course, that's hard work enough already. And then I think, changing regulations, changing the rules, changing finance systems, you need to see it like a movement, right? It depends on many different people doing very different things. But if there is some sense of a shared direction behind this, that's when you get somewhere. Change will never be the gift of one organization, one company, one state, one politician, one startup founder. Never. But if you can create a distributed movement of people, not a movement that protests in the street.
Why not?
Because they can be part of it, but they'll never write the detail of the contract, will they?
No,
the people doing blockchain that enables the transactions behind this probably weren't the ones exclusively spending their time protesting in the streets. No. They were doing the dark matter work behind the scenes to enable this distributed future to exist. So and I think that's also, you can be hopeful, right? Because lots of movements are going in this direction. Lots of systems are being built that enable this distributed democratic future to emerge, right? None of us are on our own. There's a lot of people moving in the same direction. If we can do that on the basis of greater shared intelligence, I think we will actually get there.
Do you feel you're already connected to this distributed shared intelligence? Are you connected to that? Okay, we'll talk about it.
I think I have a way more practical, like you said, we changed the little system. And we did it because, as you said, we started asking questions. Why you do this? Why you don't do that? What are the driving factors that would create a change in your behavior? And can I tell you a story, create a bit more, what is collective intelligence? So that's, I think, the triggering part of coming from seeing reality as it's given for granted and understanding which are the things that could change and create something that is in between those two moments in time, let's say. And this is how I see it's not one system, as he said, and that's what he means, I think, for many systems, because there are many things that need to change. But I guess from a practical perspective is starting by asking questions like the amazing examples you brought.
Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah.
Yes. What she said.
I fully agree. And searching for those who can join your search, right? I mean, don't stay in your own, room. Yeah. Whatever. Go out there, find people who are soulmates.
And I think that's an important point. Behind every project where lots of young people are involved and being enthusiastic and idealistic is always one 55-year-old site manager or the equivalent, right? Don't underestimate the appetite of people in unlikely places and of unlikely background to get involved in this stuff if you give them an invitation, which is one of the reasons why I think these movements are best not created as protest movements, but as very pragmatic, collaborative practical movements. Yes,
Yes,
definitely.
thank you so much. Joost,
Great, thank you.
Joost Beudeman. Okay. So now it's a 9:15, and we have 45 minutes left, approximately until 10, to have a public discussion. And the way we try to, well, let's say, not have it completely open is that in the book there are some notions, and we've put them into thesis or questions. And we have some people on the first rows who we have invited to comment on them first, to start up the group discussion, the public discussion with you in the audience. So that's the idea. That's also why this is a circle, and the middle is empty. I sometimes say the symbolic order of power should be empty. It's only inhabited for a short while, and then you're prime minister, and then you go again. So it's empty for a reason, because we are all equal in this discussion now. And let's have the first thing up, and that is one owner. Whoa. Okay. So everybody can really read this. Ownership is dead. Shared infrastructures are the cradle of new urbanity. So that is one of these notions. Ownership is dead. And we have two people who are going to respond to this statement first. The first is Paulus Achterberg. She's in the room on the first row. She's the director of strategy at Allianz. Company. And then we have, there we have him, Michel Bouwens, from the founder of the Peer-to-Peer Foundation and the Common Strategy Group, who is here joining us through Skype. Welcome, Michel Bouwens. Hi.
Hello.
Okay, so Ms. Achterberg, let me start with you to fire up this discussion. What is your idea on this statement? Ownership is dead.
Ownership is dead. Yeah, well, I work at Alliander. We own infrastructures. Yeah. Alliander is owned by all kind of provinces and municipalities, yes. And in a way that is perceived as organizing the commons. But there is absolutely a change in how to look at infrastructure. So if new infrastructures are coming up, for instance, charging infrastructure for cars, should it be some kind of utility that owns them, or can we just say that everybody who wants a charging pole buys one and shares them? Yes. And well, the battle hasn't been won yet, but I think still a lot of companies are striving for having the assets.
Owning it.
To own it.
Yes.
But the way I see things develop, that ownership will be worthless. So what's happening is the access to grids are relevant, and that's what legislation can help. And if you open it up like that, we get a completely different society. It's a thing like infrastructure can be seen as, well, we all have rooms and we can share them through Airbnb. You have a sharing economy for rooms. And in the same way, we can do that with all kind of infrastructures. And because it's not about having the room, it's about having the community, it's a simple way of changing legislation, and it's just as open as you want it.
Okay, so you say there's still an idea at a lot of companies that ownership matters, but you say it finally will be worthless. The access is the way to create value. Michel Bouwens, can I ask you to comment on the statement, ownership is dead, sharing infrastructures are the cradle of new urbanity?
I'm quite critical of that meme because
for one second, where are you?
Oh, I'm in Ghent in Belgium,
okay.
Where I'm sitting in a very hot place. Sorry for that.
Okay. Continue. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, so I'm quite critical of that meme because in most cases two things happen, which is there's still an owner, which is a centralized company, and you merely get access for money. So it's sold to us as being not being property, like in car sharing and stuff. But the cars are still owned by a company, and the danger there, of course, is that we are left owning nothing as individuals and completely dependent on our monetary means in order to access the things we need in life. So we should be careful about that kind of, mislabeling of, no property. But there is another kind of way in which we can go beyond property, which I think is, essentially two ways. One is the cooperative way. So, in the case of the so-called peer-to-peer and so-called sharing economy, which is, not sharing, the platform could be a commons or it could be a cooperative. So even if we are engaging in market transactions with each other, the environment in which we operate could be something that's commonly owned and governed by the various stakeholders. There's also a bit of a revival of something called non-dominium, which is a kind of property which belongs to no one. So I'll just give you an example of this. This is a good friend of mine called Sensorica. It's an open scientific hardware community. And they're about to launch a network of 6 different fab labs in Montreal. And everything that's common is put in a separate account that doesn't belong to any individual. So in that case, it's a form of property, but that doesn't belong to any particular individual. But in any case, I think that in a world which is based on property, the defense against property has to be another form of property, because otherwise you have what is called in Latin terra nullius or res nullius, which means if it doesn't belong to anyone, anybody can take and capture it.
Yeah, you say you need the protection of property. So the
exactly,
protection...
and so we need forms of common property.
Yes.
We just need we should not define the commons as the absence of property, because in that case it's not a commons, it's an open access resource which can be enclosed by private and state players.
And could that idea of common property, could it also entail waste? Could we own in a cooperative way our waste?
Of course. I mean, the whole thing about cooperatives as they've existed in the last 200 years is that there is a danger that they act as collective capitalists. So even though the property is shared between the members, they are still competing in a scarcity-based, competitive-based system, and bit by bit are applying the same kind of practices than private companies. So the property form by itself is not enough. You have to apply what I call the LSD mode of production. It only sounds good in French: libre, solidaire et durable. So it's the sharing of the knowledge.
The D is for, I didn't libre, solidaire and?
Excuse me?
The D stands for?
Durable, solidaire et durable. Libre, solidaire et durable.
Yes, LSD. Good.
So these 3 elements have to be, in my view, joined at the hip. Otherwise, what you get is a company which is going to do sustainability while exploiting people, or making organic food but not sharing the knowledge that is needed for other people to move in the same direction.
Yes. Thank you so much for introducing these ideas. Let me go to the audience for 1 second. For 1 second, not for 1 second, I'm sorry. Let me go to the audience and ask them to reflect on this statement. Who wants to share an insight? Yes.
Well, the approaches we've heard so far, they're very much centered on being sustainable by means of reducing consumption and not buying things very frequently. But one thing that's also sustainable is increasing modularity and is increasing repairability. And one thing that a company can do that usually a community of people cannot do so well is take responsibility for repairability and really increase and improve workflows for repairability. For example, there is a very interesting project in the Netherlands where you rent headphones. You don't buy them, and if they're broken, you can send it to the company, and the company will mend it, will repair it, and send it back to you. So that is the thing a company can definitely do, and where a company the ownership stays with the company, but that's also part of sustainability that somehow neglected sometimes in the discussion, I feel. Repairability.
Okay. So is this true? Do you want to comment, Mr. Bouwens, or who wants to comment? Miss Achterberg, ja. Goeie schoenen aan voor deze hele ronde.
Goed gedaan. Yes, if you would take the presentation of Joost into account, that would simply mean that we could forbid something to sell. So you cannot sell anymore, which would be the end of property.
Yeah. You would just say you are not allowed to sell this specific asset.
Well, any object.
Just okay, this is very difficult for me to grasp. So you say just have legislation where you are forbidden to sell any object. That sounds like a revolution.
So we wanted a system change. We were looking for.
I just go to Mr. Wernerman. Is this the kind of like system change that you were thinking about? Just having less, not to consider how we're going to pass that kind of legislation, but okay, that's the second question.
I think that would probably be a potential endpoint of a whole lot of more urgent things that we could do before that. I wouldn't hang all the solutions on that. But I do think that Mr. Bouwens makes a very important point. We have to create ourselves the open platforms through which we can trade, and that also might then impact on the repair point, right? The closed companies have no incentives to create opportunities for repair. Differently owned, differently operating companies might have the incentives that will actually drive them to do these kind of things.
So these are just short notions, yes.
Tomorrow my friend Mark van Baal has a shareholder meeting with Shell. And you can also join him, his club. He's a green shareholder of Shell. And he has another model of changing the world. And take all the green stockholders to make a change within Shell. And he finds a lot of friends, zoals Duncan Stitterheim and other Delft engineers like me. And who became a shareholder. And he's trying to change Shell from within. I think that's also a possibility to do. Tomorrow is his big day. He creates a lot of publicity.
Yes, it was already 3 times here in the Pakhuis de Zwijger. Very good. Follow this if you want to be a shareholder at Shell.
Hi. So I'm going to play a bit of a devil's advocate here because, the community property is something that is not new. And as I come from Mexico, and we do have forms of community property there, especially regarding land rights, and it's a big issue. And while I think that agency of people is a very important thing while getting this kind of initiatives to be recognized and emulated in certain ways, I do feel that sometimes the public policy part is a bit ignored.
Thank you so much for bridging and ending this notion on this ownership thing, because we're going to go to the second statement. But if you say no, we cannot, because I have a very important thing to say.
Michel already mentioned, of course, that stuff is can be have non-owners, but who owns the waste that is part of this circular city? Because it's owned before it becomes waste, but who owns it? And how is that transfer handled?
At the moment.
At the moment.
Okay. So, Francesca, who owns our waste in Amsterdam?
Well, the municipality So us, the public goods, let's say like that. But that's a nice question, because in the last 2 decades there has been a big revolution in the electricity providing sector. And people have been grouping up and finding solutions, for example, the Brooklyn one that we presented, of thinking about how to owning your own energy and providing your own energy in a different way. I'm not saying that we should do this with everything that allows us to have our daily life, but using that as an example of thinking how to manage your waste, or what you want to do with waste, water, air. Those are all things that there is a lot of discussion around the commons, and a lot of discussions around the commons on buildings. But what about these streams? Can we approach them as commons? That's definitely a way to go, in my opinion.
Yes. Good. Thank you. We're going to go to the second statement, and that is people, people, people are the cornerstone of urban circularity, and you'll never walk alone. And want to comment on that firsthand? The first who will comment, and that's Francesca. Again, very, very shortly. And then Michiel Schwartz, which is from the Sustainism Lab. So Francesca, very short, brief comment.
Well, I think I've been making my point throughout the whole evening. Start with people, ask people, what are your problems, what do you want, and build up something with them, because they are the ones that will actually change behavior. And you can get all the technology of this planet, but if people are not intelligent enough to start changing behavior and owning that new behavior, nothing is going to happen.
So we don't need just technical stuff, we need social innovation. Yes, Mr. Schwartz.
Yeah, I certainly agree that we can't do just with technical, but I think we have to go further than that. There was talk about the infrastructure. I think we have to talk about social infrastructures. And what is a social infrastructure? It's relationships and it's communities. And most of the examples that we've heard tonight, the really key is with the relationships and communities. But it's important to stress, when we talk about changing behavior, we're still trapped in this idea that we individually have to change our behavior. Whereas the strength of all the examples, and I just looking at my notes, Joost Boonderman was very clear on, when you talk about the collective intelligence or civic engagement, or we look in practical things like what's happening in Brooklyn. These are really collective things. And part of that is the shift, and this is really a deeply cultural shift. It's not just individual behavior, a shift that I call sustainist. You can also see it from the I generation to the we generation. It has to do with sharing. Of course, it has to do with collective ownership. So all these words that we've heard are an indication that of the two, not only that people are the cornerstones, but communities of people and communities of practice are the cornerstones of urban circularity. And therefore, the never walk alone is, of course, and we all know that we're also stronger together individually, and our lives depend on social relationships. So we always treat as if the social relationship are sort of the soft factor in these things, and the hard factors are the technologies and the apps and the sort of physical infrastructure. But if you go through history, all those things changed radically. They're much more unpredictable, the technologies, than the human behavior, because we've always been social beings.
Yes. So the starting point is the community of peoples. Who wants to comment on that from the audience? On that statement as a notion, or are you all in agreement and saying, okay, perfectly clear? Yes, sir.
So I don't really think that capitalism is built on we. I think it's more built on I, which is definitely one of the biggest problems about this whole debate. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say, actually.
So if you really believe what you believe, Mr. Schwartz, what is the relationship with the economic model we're now currently in, capitalism?
I think an important reason why people, whether individually or collectively, change their behavior, because they actually view the world differently. And I think what I find really exciting about this so-called circular city making and all the examples we heard, that it's on a deeper level that we may have capitalism, we may have different forms of capitalism, but those different forms will be part of a different, the best word is probably ethos, and the word ethos is not just a view of the world about what we value, like sharing or connecting to each other or to the environment, but ethos also means, in Dutch, it's a handelingsperspectief. It's sort of, it's action. So the discussion whether it's capitalist or not, capitalist is also a form of action and exchange and so on. I'm not saying capitalism will go away, and because there's still capitalism, we can't collectively do things. What we see, especially in the localist and micro-localist, that there's enormous power of doing things collectively, and sometimes they're for profit, but sometimes they're not for profit. So I think it's an issue that belongs a little bit to the sort of modernist rather than what I call the sustainist era, where these dynamics are partly informed by things where the capitalism or socialism is a secondary question.
Exactly. It's really the Nobel Prize winner you were referring to. We're saying we were too much focused on the market versus the private sphere and the market and the public sphere and the state. And there's a whole lot of realm outside of that, which you can call collective or commons, or which has been underappreciated the last 100 years. Yes.
My name is Sim Gedaan. The New Economic Foundation coined a notion of the core economy, which is communal and family life that builds on, you need a core economy to sustain people. And that's par excellence local, and it's par excellence family and community, neighbors and stuff like that. And the financialized capitalism is built on that. It's actually thriving on this core economy that sustains people to work for big companies and stuff like that. So, and there's this core economy thrives in commoning, and that's why localism is a good first step to hack financialized capitalism.
Very good. Thank you so much for giving that systemic answer. We're going to go to the third statement. Regulation must not lag behind the niche. Without new rules, the process is too slow. We already talked about that in one of few discussions. Let's go to Barbara Kolen. You are working at Wasted. Can you explain what your first response is to this statement?
Well, I agree with it for sure. I think that one of the big problems of the circular city is that not everything can be done just in a city, and that's also what the chapter in the book that I co-wrote is about. Is kind of looking at the city as an urban region within different levels of government that all need to change. There was this contribution from the audience just yet who said, I'm kind of missing the public policy perspective, and I think that really relates to this statement as well, because it basically, we do need to make new rules. And for example, in the Netherlands on a national level, we now have a resource agreement that was signed in January, and this is currently being implemented, and transition agendas are being designed. And as we watch that, what we really notice is that there is a lot of attention for regulation, but the attention that it gets is mostly trying to adapt this regulation to the new innovations. And that is, in my opinion, good, because of course, new innovations often have like barriers that they encounter and that regulation needs to be changed for. But what I'm kind of missing in the approach, and that should be there, is setting new rules and showing some ambition and courage to actually already start making those steps. Because there is a lot going on. There's a lot of pioneering projects, and I think our book really shows that quite clearly already. But what is missing is there's still a big mainstream that is not paying attention to the circular movement yet. So I think that, for example, one thing that has also already been mentioned here is this kind of responsibility of producers for the entire life cycle of their products. These are the type of rules and regulation that maybe on a national level, but maybe even on a European level, there should be new rules and regulation. And I think that that's something that would really catalyze the process, and that, we should start pushing for.
Thank you. So you say it's not ambitious enough. Can you respond on that, Mr. Savini, Assistant Professor of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Amsterdam?
Yes, I can say that I totally agree. And I would like just to address what is written in the statement with the word niche. There is another side of the coin whenever we mention the niche, is the environment where the niche is growing. Or other people call it sometimes a regime to emphasize the system of rules that in fact allow other types of systems to sustain themselves, the system that Jos was mentioning. So what I need, in fact, myself to change the system is not necessarily a broad amount of new rules that will promote new niches. In fact, niches should not be paternalized. They're very good sometimes in connecting themselves, in sharing information, making apps, one here, one there. They're very creative, and in fact, we should not paternalize the niche. But what we should do is to look at the environment where the niche exists, and in fact, use what we can call negative rules to reduce those barriers that make the niche have in trouble to upscale, if we call it that way. So these rules are the rules of what we have already mentioned, of capitalism, of the polluters, the big polluters, of the linear economies. And these rules are not discussed enough. That's clear enough. What we see in the policies, at least in Amsterdam or even in the Netherlands, we see very cherry-picking trigger points of promoting new ideas, but we see very little discussion on the big issues, the fossil fuel economy. And why is so? Because we can all agree that niches needs to be promoted. It's very hard to disagree on that. Every party or group can agree on that. But we may strongly disagree or even fight, yes, on the street perhaps, about which companies needs to be reduced. And then opens the question also, who pays for this? So we are...
Who will pay the losers of the transition?
Exactly. The social cost of the transition become an issue as soon as we think about regulation that decrease the barrier for niches. That's why these questions are very difficult to be addressed, but they should.
Yeah. Because otherwise you will not see a true development to circular economy.
No, I mean true development. Yes, I think you will see a circular economy either struggling in the ideal sense of it, so sharing, or being co-opted into a new model which will be not really community-based or shared.
Thank you. I'm going to Rutger Sipkes from BAM, who's a big construction firm. What's your comment on this statement?
Yeah, well, we work daily in the construction business and we are regulated by rules. And that's really tough because we want to do new things. We're talking to Francesca. We want to build stuff with plastics. And we are daily encountering rules that are preventing this. And so we are here learning what can we do to set new regulations and learn from the UK maybe. I'm really interested in how you tackled regulations, building with videotapes and all kinds of materials that we would really like to do. But if you would even bring up the idea, the next day we will have policymakers from Amsterdam in my office saying, well, this is not possible. And so I'm really interested in the whole process. We had one of these evenings where design, financing, making things, using stuff, demolishing, looking for people who are thinking likewise, like all of us, and find these people, asking them the questions, how to change this whole processes altogether. So yeah, that's my comment.
Thanks. You say we are ambitious, and you want to answer it? Probably because it was an exhibition or an example case, or is it not? Yeah, no. The question is, how could you even build get permission to build a waste house?
It's to do with knowledge. It's to know, it's knowing about the performance of stuff and the components of stuff, and that's how you can get permits. That's how you get the permits, because you know how materials perform, and so you know there are options to the normal materials that are used, and that's how you do it. But also, ironically, BAM are one of my heroes in terms of citing case studies for building in a circular way, which I could talk about later. But for me, regulations, if you really understand them, you can unpack them and infiltrate and subvert. So it's about knowledge. Yeah.
Hack the regulations, yes.
We've been talking about global north, so I wonder what's happening in the global south as well. So somehow talking about circularity and waste, we should think in a global scale. And somehow I know that some countries sell their waste into the global south to bury it in the landfill and things like that. So somehow regulations should be global, on a global scale to think and rethink. And also, shall we actually think about, at the beginning, this kind of consumerist behavior and also economy? Is it really sustainable? And also this kind of built-in obsolescence of products that we are buying and we make to desire for. So somehow what to do with that?
Actually, it's a brilliant question, which everybody now thinks, yeah, that's a good question. Does anybody feel the need to reflect on it? Yeah.
In a more general way, some of you may have heard about the Brussels Circular Economy package, which is being voted at the moment, or it's in process of being voted. All of the things which have been brought up are not in. There is no producer responsibility, there is no mandatory reuse. There are a lot of things which the politicians simply have passed over because they don't want to take the decisions. And when you look at the global scheme, we are still one of the best in the world. I mean, because at least we have some regulations. There are countries in the world, I'm very much involved in the marine litter debates on a global scale. If we would already have the Dutch situations all over the planet, we would already be very well. Yeah. So there is a lot to do. There's a lot of knowledge in the Netherlands. And we should certainly not wait for regulations. The private sector should move on.
Not wait for regulations, please. We are already very... Okay, yes.
Thank you. Very interesting because, for instance, I'm spending time in Southeast Asia, where I see cities like Jakarta, 10 million people, like a snowball, growing economy like 20% per year. And the point is how I see so much innovation, so many bright minds in Europe, in the Netherlands, working on these issues. And I ask myself, and I ask to you, how do we penetrate these powerfully growing economies with these issues in lands where we can almost walk on the rivers for how much plastic there is? And I consider it being a crime against humanity, all this marine litter pollution. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of legal scholars also thinking about that question, of course. Okay, so this is a very involved audience. It's quite clear, right? I mean, much more people want to talk and respond to the statement than is possible within the time frame of this discussion. I want to go to the fourth statement, and I'm going to keep it very short because I think everybody will agree on it, but let's see. Education, it's too bad. Circular education is paramount for the wider population. So not only on children's level or on basic education, but also on the population at large. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, I've commented quite a lot, but I do think it is all down to what people know and spreading the word. And that's why I think we do need exemplars. We do need lots of examples. So for example, if the next iPhone was a circular iPhone, Apple would only have to mine for resources for 1 year to have 100 years worth of iPhones. So it's those sorts of statistics. If say the iPhone 10 launched in 2 years' time was designed for remanufacture, Apple would only have to mine for resources for 1 year in 100 years. So actually, there are a lot of companies, large companies, that know that they've got to change their linear systems into circular ones, because linear systems, they don't work, they don't pay. The biggest companies in the world don't own much stuff. They own data. And those companies are going to start buying each other out. So in 5 years' time, it's going to be one company that owns everything. What do they do the day after? So we need to know that there are a lot of people around the world that think like we do, and we need to spread the word, and that you can do through education.
Yes. And these examples we are talking about this night are paramount for that. I mean, they're very useful in inspiring people. Does anybody want to say something about education? Because then we're going to go to the fifth and last statement, and we have 8 minutes left for sharing some other thoughts.
I would take education quite literally, even. Tomorrow I'm receiving some children from a basisschool to one of our projects. And I think we hardly have teachers left in this country. And they're certainly not teaching circularity in schools. So I would take it quite literally and ask if someone would step up and have it as a subject in basisscholen and high schools.
Okay, so I have to ask, is somebody here representing educational facilities? Some, yes. And the question is, are you willing to the notion of circularity and circular economy into the education system?
I'm Alicia, by the way. I'm education manager of Wasted, so we educate about plastic and plastic recycling. And it's really funny. I always ask my school children the question, how can we make the waste system better at your school? And one time the answer was, why don't we come up with recycle science? So maybe that should be a new thing at school, circular education, and come up with a new one.
Real circular education. So really understanding like what materials are actually doing. If you have a C together with an O, and then you create like, anything. Is that the answer to your question? Because you were whispering, what do you mean with circular education? Okay. Now I'm gonna go to the last, because I'm looking at the time. It's 7 to 10 already. I'm gonna go to the last statement. Circularity is not the sole goal. It's not a goal. It's a means for a systemic change. So it's formed the idea. There he is again in a very hot environment. Michel Bouwens, can I ask you to respond to this notion? It's not a goal. Are you still there?
Yes, I fully agree with that. I fully agree with that statement. First of all, you're probably aware of the study of François Gross, which has shown that above 1% growth in matter and energy usage, in the usage of natural resources, the circular economy doesn't do anything. It merely postpones by maximum 60 years the depletion of certain resources. So circular, it's just a means to an end. And it certainly has to be combined to goals of fairness. So the damage we do to the natural environment should not be independent of the damage we do to the human environment. My stress would be on mutualization. We just published a study on the thermodynamics of peer production, where we show that through mutualization we can diminish by 70 to 80% the footprint. But the thing is, if you only do that technically, then of course the Jevons paradox, will not function. So it's not a technical issue.
But you have to explain this paradox. You can't look at the eyes of the people in the audience, but they are a bit wondering now what you mean.
The Jevons paradox is the rebound effect, meaning you make a sustainable lighting system, and if you don't change anything else in the system, then more people are going to use light.
Yeah.
So you basically haven't done anything. It's the same what's happening with IKEA is very efficient. It has halved its use of matter and energy for a given production, but since it wants to grow, it still will use more wood. And so its sustainability efforts are not really making a dent.
Yeah, we get the rebound
in that
effect.
sense.
Yes, thank you. Very good. Okay, continue your sentence. I mean, I was interrupting you. Sorry, Mr. It's a bit difficult through Skype. I'm going to go to Mr. Bernerman first to respond to this statement.
No, I think Michel said it all and said it better than I could. Ultimately, the point is to get to a system that's more libre, solidaire, et durable. And LSD, and it's never either or. Like you say, the most horrible environmental destruction is happening where there's also the worst social exploitation. The two always go hand in hand. If we want to create a more democratic city, this is one way towards it. Ultimately, your point about capitalism, ultimately, people want to belong more than they want stuff. We're currently stuck in a system that seems to equate stuff with belonging, right? And that's what a lot of companies are really good at. If we create new ways of creating belonging, our necessity for stuff will reduce. If we had more fulfilling work, we wouldn't have the need to consume so much in the weekend, right? If we had better communities and better places, we didn't have to go to shopping malls all the time. That's what I really think is the point with capitalism, is that it drives us apart and it drives us to consume. If we find new ways of bringing communities together, creating human interactions and ways of belonging, then this circular city story is part of a bigger a road towards more freedom, solidarity and sustainability.
Yes. Translated LSD, it sounds much less funny. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. I was wondering if anyone knows of trends indicating that we're using potentially less products. I know that the population is still growing, but also the digitization of products. I mean, no one buys any CDs, any videotapes. Do we think that's going to have any positive influence on the use of materials in the future?
Who knows? We want facts, not beliefs. Yes, no, you were already a lot. Yeah, I'm just going to check. No, it's really nice that you're contributing. Yes.
Hi. Well, it's a nice idea of that we're reducing the videotapes and video cassette tapes and stuff. But the fact is that the internet system is now using about 2% of all the energy, and so it's even more than airlines now. So it's not entirely hooray for the digitality.
No. Yeah. Materials, are we actually buying less stuff, was the question. Does anybody know? Nobody knows? Do you know?
Well, are you actually buying less stuff? I'm not. I mean, we are always buying something. It's...
No, okay. We don't know. That's the real answer. But you can also fantasize for that a little bit. He's right, actually. Sending a letter is less CO2 emissions than in sending an email. Yes. Okay. You wanted to say something in the round before this, and I ignored you.
Yeah, I'm a little bit wondering whether I still believe in the current democratic Western democracy in currency. No. Just when you imagine in the Marker Lake, there's a new area, start a new country, and start a new state, equivalent to our regulations, but rethink democracy and economy, and also do it for refugees with flexible housing. Let them create their own democracy with their own waste reuse, and let them take the city to where they want to live.
Okay, this is a very philosophical but revolutionary idea. I mean, let's also reinvent democracy as it is today, because it is producing the results we have today. Very good. Okay, Francesca, the official moment. I want to thank already, before we're going to do the audience, for such a great debate and discussion. But join me on stage now, because I'm going to give you the stage to actually launch your book. Yeah. The book you in the audience. Yes. Normally you would offer the first exemplar, help me? Yeah. Copy, thank you. The first copy to somebody special.
Yes.
But you, of course, decided to do it differently.
Yes.
Yes. So this is now the moment you have your official book launch.
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank you for staying here until now, because it wasn't an evening for delight at heart. It was a very content-intense evening. So is the book. As you said, there is a vacuum of power, and it's nice when you can share as much as possible with people that have been that are part of your community, that are part of your network. So that's how we're gonna do it tonight.
Okay.
I would like to thank and to ask everyone from Wasted, Elisha, Gertje, Siske, Mariana, Mehdi, come up here with me. I would like to also ask Jos, Federico, Michelle, Duncan, Pallas, Barbara, Mehdi I already said, Mart, Yeva, Max, Sharda, Marlies, Evert, and Natasha to come here.
So now the entire room is on the
Yes.
stage. We'll see whether that fits.
Yes, so please take the book.
You're invited.
Take the book.
Take the book. Take
Yes,
the book. All of you
it's your
take one
book. You've been part of it as contributors, as part of the journey of Wasted, as part of discussions, as active members of the Wasted community management every Wednesday afternoon. Like we start like really from the practice and up to Jost, which has been amazing tonight. Thank you. And thanks to everyone. I think I really enjoyed the conversation.
Nobody can see you.
Yeah.
Give her a warm, give us a warm applause.
Yeah.
Warm thank you. And then I say, buy that book.
Yes.
You can buy it here in the lobby if you leave this venue. Downstairs there are drinks to celebrate the launch of this book. It's fantastic weather outside, so let's all go outside. I want to thank all guests tonight for their participation and contribution, and I would love to thank the audience for your great participation. Thank you so much for this evening, and give a big thank you to the person who's sitting next to you. Yeah. This is it for Wasted, but we want to invite you for on the 19th of June. Oh, sorry. There's a new economy session of Trouw, but on the 14th there is a landscape and energy session. And on the 6th of June there is a session on waste is business. So you're all invited to join us then.